This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. With close races in both the Senate and especially the House, voter turnout will be the key to which party controls each chamber and ultimately the message from Washington for the next 2 years. President Donald Trump hit the campaign trail this weekend, talking the economy and immigration.
We can talk about the economy, but the fact is we know how well we're doing with the economy, and we have to solve problems. Democrats are openly encouraging millions of illegal aliens to break our laws, violate our sovereignty, overrun our borders.
Joins us now from Washington with more. So, Amber, what message are both parties pushing on this day ahead of the election?
Hey, Ephraim. So as you just heard in that clip from the president is honing in on two things, and that's the economy, coming in on that strong jobs report from October on Friday. And then he's also honing in on immigration. This is something we saw in 2016, and we're seeing it again today on the border wall, on the idea of this caravan that's making its way through Mexico, and on pushing for candidates that are going to help him and support his immigration policies. On the flip side, the Democrats are pushing for health care. Something that we have seen consistently in polling as the highest issue for voters. So Democrats are pushing on health care. Who's going to protect those pre-existing conditions? Who are going to fight for Medicaid, Medicare?
All right, here we sit less than 24 hours before all things begin. So, Amber, where is the president headed today?
So the president, nonstop all the way down to the wire. He's heading today to two highly contested Senate races. He's heading to Indiana, where you see the incumbent Joe Donnelly facing off with the Republican Mike Braun. And he's heading to Missouri, fighting for the Senate, the GOP candidate there. The president is hoping that since he won those states in 2016, that he can kind of rally the base and get those same voters out to stump for or to vote for the candidates there in the Senate races.
All right, those candidates hoping for that support as well. Amber Strong reporting from our Washington bureau. Thank you, Amber.
Always.
Polls in the Michigan Senate race showed Republican challenger John James closing the gap on Democratic incumbent Debbie Stabenow. Caitlin Burke brings us this look at where the race for Republicans are hoping to take a seat away from the Democrats.
The Senate race in Michigan has gotten closer, with underdog Republican candidate John James making a late October surge in the polls. Now he's giving incumbent Senator Debbie Stabenow the political fight of her life.
This whole race started on my knees. This whole thing started with praying for wisdom and asking the Lord to not necessarily make my path easy, but to make it clear, and has absolutely done that. So I have the faith and believe that I may be in this position for a time such as this, and it's not because I'm anything special, but because God is preparing to do a great work in the state of Michigan.
Michigan is a key battleground. President Trump barely won the state in 2016.
It was the closest margin of victory of any state in the country. So although he did win, his victory shows a very closely divided state.
Now, as Republicans fight to maintain control of the House and Senate, political analyst and reporter Robert Yoon sees Michigan as a state to watch because voters here tend to cross party lines for candidates who appeal to them.
They've shown that in elections in the past where they'd elect Republican governors and a Democratic senator, or in the case of 2016, vote for a Republican for president.
Democrat incumbent Stabenow has represented Michigan in the Senate for 18 years, serving as a commissioner, state representative, and U.S. representative along the way. We reached out to the Stabenow campaign with interview requests and received no response. Throughout her campaign, Stabenow has focused on standing up for families, farmers, and job creation. She also points to her ability to work across the aisle, even in a divisive political climate.
I've worked with Democrats and Republicans my whole life to get things done.
John James, meanwhile, has no previous political experience. He's a veteran and a successful Detroit businessman.
You have so many people in Washington who are, as far as business is concerned, they're legislating and regulating industries, and they've never run a business before. I would say that what are their qualifications to impose on the people? I believe that there's no replacement or substitute for experience.
He says his time on the front lines taught him about strong national security. Business experience formed his stance on economic opportunity. And by bringing together soldiers from different backgrounds under his command, he knows a thing or two about unity.
During the primaries, President Trump endorsed James when he was trailing, helping him secure the Republican nomination. Now, with only days left until the election, the White House continues to support the political novice from Michigan.
Yoon says that while Stabenow initially ignored her Republican rival, she's now running ads about her work with veterans and the military, and warning about the close tie between James and President Trump. Not much time remains to see what will make the difference for these candidates on Tuesday. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And CBN News will have special coverage of election night from 8 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time on November 6th on the CBN News channel. Make sure that you tune in and join us. Here now is a quick look at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee have cleared Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct allegations. The committee tweeted Saturday investigators spoke with 45 individuals and took 25 written statements. According to The Hill, the 414-page report states committee investigators found no verifiable evidence that supported Christine Blasey Ford's allegation against Kavanaugh. The report additionally dismisses allegations from two other accusers, Deborah Ramirez and Julie Swetnick. Egypt's security forces have killed 19 militants, including those responsible for a recent attack against Christians. 7 Christians were killed and 16 wounded Friday in an attack on pilgrims traveling to a remote desert monastery. ISIS claimed responsibility for that attack. Egypt's Interior Ministry says the militants responsible were tracked to a hideout in the desert near the site of the attack and were killed in a shootout. Asia Bibi's husband is seeking asylum for their family. He told a German news site that he and his family are afraid for their safety. The Christian woman was acquitted on charges of blasphemy last week, sparking numerous protests and calls for a public hanging by the Islamic country. Pakistan's government brokered a deal with the TLP, an Islamist political party known for street power and opposition to the country's blasphemy law, in order to end protests over Asia Bibi's acquittal. Her husband said the deal never should have happened and sent shivers down his spine. You can find more on this story and others throughout the day at cbnnews.com. Coming up, another world leader says he will move his country's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. We're going to break down which country wants to make that change. Coming up right after this. Right now may not be the best time to go to Saudi Arabia, but a delegation of American evangelical leaders felt it was worth taking the risk. So they made the historic visit and met with the Saudi Crown Prince and other government leaders. As Chris Mitchell reports, the Christian delegation's trip had a long-term purpose in mind, and it was filled with spiritual opportunity.
The visit came following a global firestorm over the death of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But the planning began a long time ago. The meeting between evangelical leaders from the U.S. and Mohammed bin Salman had been in the works for months, but it came to pass when the delegation made a visit here to the United Arab Emirates.
I think there's a lot of people that would say this is the wrong time to go to Saudi Arabia and meet with the leadership there. I understand that criticism, but I disagree.
While they realized the potential for controversy, the group felt the opportunity to help Christians there was more important.
Given the fact that we care about the people of Saudi Arabia, Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula, the desire to see more freedom of worship, even Christian churches being allowed to be built. Listen, this all seemed important to us.
When people ask, why would you go and why would you meet? I mean, as a Christian called to be a peacemaker, as an advocate for freedom of worship, as an advocate for tolerance and peaceful coexistence, I mean, my answer to that question is, how can I not?
They went not with a political agenda, but with a Christian mission.
Well, when I think of Saudi Arabia, I think of that verse, we are ambassadors for Christ. That's who we're representing, not the United States of America. We're representing the Lord Jesus Christ.
You know, in the Bible, people like Esther, who was in a royal court, Daniel, who approached several kings and played key positions, God used them to speak to people in authority, kings, and the Bible says we're to pray for them.
This is the latest in a series of meetings with Sunni Arab leaders. Those leaders including Jordan's King Abdullah, Egyptian President El-Sisi, and the Crown Prince of the UAE. The meetings are part of a long-term agenda.
We aren't here for a short-term purpose. We are not here for a photo op. We could care less about that. We're here to build long-term relations and to benefit our brothers and sisters that are here in this region.
Rosenberg encouraged Christians to pray.
We're under no illusions about the challenges that have been in Saudi Arabia and remain, but I think it's respectful to go and listen to leaders who have the opportunity to make life better for Christians and actually for Muslims and potentially for Israel as well. I ask people to pray. Pray for the king, pray for the crown prince, pray for the leaders, pray for the people of Saudi Arabia.
And CBN's Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. So, Chris, you were there with the delegation before they left for Saudi Arabia. What did this delegation of Christians hope to accomplish, and what do you think will come of their visit?
Well, you know, Ephraim, when I was there with the delegation before they went to Riyadh, you had the sense that this was history in the making. Just before they had gone, they had met with the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed. And so that was history making, and this even more so. And I think what they want to accomplish is, as they said in the piece, they want this to be the beginning of a long-term relationship. This is just the latest in a series of meetings. King Abdullah of Jordan, President El-Sisi of Egypt, the Crown Prince of the UAE. And so they want to begin this dialogue with many of these Sunni Arab leaders.
Describe what it's like for Christians in Saudi Arabia.
It's very difficult, Ephraim. You know, it's really, Christianity is really not recognized in Saudi Arabia. And I think this was part of a dialogue on behalf of Christians in the region. They had just come, as I said, from the United Arab Emirates, and really they see that as a model for Christians in the region. As we were there, we went to a Christian worship service. We talked with a local pastor, and the UAE really has a measure of tolerance and freedom that Jerry Johnson, who is the president of the NRB, told us would like to be a model not only for the UAE, but for many Sunni Arab nations in the Middle East.
Now, we said that the Saudi Crown Prince met with these evangelicals. Why would he want to do that?
Well, I think he wanted to do that to begin the dialogue on his part. He's really been the start of reforms in Saudi Arabia that really have been historic and groundbreaking. Women driving, tourists can come there. He's building a great tourist center for 2030. So this, on his behalf, was probably the continuation of these reforms. Also, some of the members of that delegation are part of Trump's religious advisory board. So I think it helps the relationship between the Trump administration and Saudi Arabia as well.
Chris, I'd like to talk to you a bit about Iran. Today, the U.S. reimposed its toughest sanctions ever against the country. We've already seen protests. What else do you think we should expect?
Well, I think we're going to see that continuation of protests within Iran. The economy, the sanctions, even up to now, have been putting a lot of pressure on the economy. The rial, Iran's currency, is falling, and I think that really is going to ratchet up the economic pressure within Iran. And I would say, related to our story we've been talking about, Iran really is the common enemy of many of these Sunni Arab nations, and that's why they see it to their advantage to reach out to U.S. evangelical leaders, to reach out to the Trump administration, because everyone sees Iran as the common enemy, the one in the Middle East that really wants to take over the whole region and then ultimately the world. So these sanctions are really going to put a lot of pressure on Iran, and we'll see what happens. People have talked in the past about the possibility of regime change. That's a very real possibility, increasingly so now these sanctions are in place.
All right, Chris Mitchell reporting from Jerusalem for us. Thank you so much, Chris. Still ahead, from the football field to writing children's books, we're going to show you Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy's latest project. Tony Dungy is a Super Bowl winning coach and a popular sports analyst. He's also written several books, including 2 new children's books. CBN's Jenna Browder sat down with him to talk about the lessons he's hoping to pass on to children, as well as his take on NFL players kneeling during the national anthem and his deep-seated faith.
Tony Dungy is a man who's worn many hats: a Super Bowl winning coach, sports analyst and commentator, and author.
Well, it was actually Lauren's idea.
His latest project is a series of children's books written with his wife, Lauren.
This is actually our second series where we kind of centered it on sports teams so we could have kids from all neighborhoods and all walks of life, and with things that most kids come across, but they have to find their way through with the help of their coaches and their parents.
And Austin, his team is not doing so well. 6 straight losses.
Yep, they're not winning, and so one of the players comes up with an idea of how they can win, but it's not exactly within the rules. And Austin has to figure out if it's the right thing to do to try to win at all costs, or do you really need to play by the rules? And we're hoping that kids, number one, get the lesson from this, but also that parents and adults and teachers can be able to talk to kids about that and learn that life lesson.
The other is about Maria, who wants to play soccer and has to muster up the courage to get out on the field.
Talking about just our culture today, there seems to be such a lack of civility and just kindness. What do you make of it?
I think that's what our kids are getting used to. That's what they're seeing on TV. We've kind of gravitated towards that. Take care of yourself, stay in your lane. Anybody who has a different view than you are, something's wrong with them. And that's part of the lessons in these books too, that we have to get along with other people. We have to try to include other people in our conversations, on our team, and that's what God would want us to do.
Give me your thoughts on the national anthem and players who are choosing to kneel. How do you think the NFL has handled this?
I don't think the NFL's handled it great.
Tony says he wouldn't kneel if he was a player today, but supports those who do and would like to see the NFL work with them.
I don't think you can just say, well, don't do this, this isn't the right time. You've got to come up with other solutions. And I would hope the NFL would work with these players to say, okay, maybe during the national anthem isn't the right time, but let me give you a platform. You've got concerns, let's set up some meetings. Let's give you some time in the media, at our press conferences, to say, here's what's going on in my community, here's what I'm concerned about, here's some of the things that we're doing, here's some of the solutions.
I want to talk to you about faith in sports. You took some heat this past Super Bowl when you were talking about Nick Foles' faith. What do you have to say to your critics?
Well, again, this was on social media. I was working for NBC, broadcasting the game, and one of my responsibilities was to interview Nick Foles, and he told me about his Christian faith. He told me he felt that God had him on that Philadelphia Eagles team for a reason. He had been the backup quarterback, now he was starting in the Super Bowl, and he felt very confident he was going to have a good game because he believed God had him there for that purpose. And so I said that on TV, and a lot of people said, well, you shouldn't bring religion into it, and I was just reporting the facts.
Tony says the support he received outweighed the criticism.
So many people wrote in and said, hey, I'm glad that you said and reported on exactly what he said, and I'm glad you talked about his faith in Christ.
And it gave him yet another hat to wear.
And I feel like that's one of the reasons God has me at NBC, to be the voice for some of these Christian athletes who want to say those things.
A voice for these athletes, and in many ways, all Christians who choose to talk about their faith openly.
So it's all been great, and I think people have to understand that Christian athletes have the same ability to espouse their views as anyone else has. And if we ask them a question about what is allowing them to play well, and they say it's my faith in Christ or it's the Holy Spirit, we can't hold that in, and we can't begrudge them of that.
Jenna Browder, CBN News.
We can't hold that in or begrudge them of that, indeed. Stay with us. There's much more of CBN NewsWatch coming up, and it's coming up right after this. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. Time now for your Monday motivation. I'd like to leave you with this thought. If you're beating yourself up over a mistake, thinking you've derailed God's plan for your life, know this: you're simply not that powerful. In fact, God can use all things, including your mistakes, for His glory and for your good. With that word, I encourage you to make this a marvelous Monday. That will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. For those of you watching on the CBN News channel, stay tuned for the second half hour of CBN NewsWatch. For all others, goodbye and God bless.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for this second half hour. I'm Ephraim Graham. With close races in both the Senate and House, voter turnout could be the key to which party controls each chamber and ultimately the message from Washington for the next 2 years. President Donald Trump hit the campaign trail this weekend, talking the economy as well as immigration.
We can talk about the economy, but the fact is we know how well we're doing with the economy, and we have to solve problems. Democrats are openly encouraging millions of illegal aliens to break our laws, violate our sovereignty, overrun our borders.
The president rallies in 3 states today, including Indiana and Missouri. Former President Barack Obama and other Democrats are also hitting the campaign trail today to campaign for their party's candidates. All signs are just showing how important voter turnout will be. The ballot box is where Americans best voice their political disagreements, and some Senate races are tighter than expected, including Indiana. Even though that contest is 500 miles away from the White House, CBN's Amber Strong tells us all roads lead back to President Donald Trump.
It's a tale of 2 candidates sounding like they're from the same party.
Together we'll build the wall.
Or at least following presidential footsteps.
I support ICE in funding President Trump's border wall.
But hold on, one is a Democrat, so what gives?
It's like no matter where you go these days, the Trump administration is on the ballot. Indiana Senate candidate Mike Braun says for him, that's a good thing.
The businessman is banking that Trump's appeal to conservative Hoosiers and his similar plea to blue-collar workers could be enough to carry him to victory against incumbent Democrat Joe Donnelly.
The system needed to be shaken a little bit, and I think that's why Donald Trump was elected.
Braun tells CBN News his experience tackling issues like health care within his own company surprises some voters.
And then they got surprised that I was actually a business guy that took on health care, which is by far I think it's the biggest issue across the country.
But Indiana is a big state, and not everyone is ready to welcome a Trump-like candidate. According to an Indianapolis Business Journal poll, the 2 candidates are polling neck and neck. But taking a deeper look, Braun has gained ground since the Kavanaugh confirmations, but Donnelly dominates with 2 groups, young people and women. Donnelly talks about being one of only a few pro-life Democrats on the Hill. He voted in favor of Neil Gorsuch, but against Brett Kavanaugh.
I voted against Judge Kavanaugh because of concerns about his impartiality and concerns about his judicial temperament.
That decision could make the difference for this candidate by keeping the Democrat vote and wooing modern suburban women who aren't so happy with the president.
In a midterm, they can't vote against the president because he's not on the ballot, so they're taking it out on some Republican candidates. But that's just one slice of the electorate. I mean, the dirty secret about close races is that everyone matters.
And he's right. A Republican source in Indiana tells CBN News that same decision to vote against Kavanaugh re-energized conservatives to get out the vote and push for judges and the Supreme Court.
I know in our own state that has really galvanized a lot of folks that may have been kind of resting on the laurels of the Trump campaign.
While his campaign ad may sound similar to Trump, Donnelly says unlike most of his colleagues here in Washington, he has the ability to work with the president and against him.
62% of the time I've voted with President Trump. Mike was for Judge Kavanaugh on the first day. If President Trump put up Bugs Bunny, Mike would have said he should go on the court.
CBN News requested an interview with Senator Donnelly, but his office said he was unavailable. Braun says Donnelly's moderate talk is all a facade.
All of this is being done in an election year, and I go back to the things I remind Hoosiers of is that he voted against tax reform, voted for Obamacare originally as a congressman, voted against its repeal.
The Jasper, Indiana native says, like most people where he comes from, what you see is what you get, even down to his blue button-down.
I decided not to put on the suit coat and the tie that evening because I'd never worn one in 37 years. Anybody from where I grew up and came from would have said, Mike looks like he's different.
Time will tell which message clicks with Hoosiers. Election day is right around the corner. Amber Strong, CBN News.
Immigration is a key issue leading into the midterm elections tomorrow. Our Heather Sells spoke with Pastor Sam Rodriguez of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference about the latest immigration talks surrounding the migrant caravan, birthright citizenship, and the call for overall immigration reform.
The president is very clearly making immigration a top campaign issue. Many people think he is deliberately stoking fear to get out the vote. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, we could do better. Look, you can't deny the fact there's a political calculus in the president engaging the immigration rhetoric. Indeed, I actually support the president in the idea of building a wall, stopping all illegal immigration. I have personal great angst regarding the 14,000 plus individuals in this caravan. Completely aware that there are those from the hard left from Honduras that actually initiated this caravan, and that 70% of those that are coming forward are not women with children. They're actually single males. Not all of them are bad people. I would argue the vast majority of good, God-fearing people looking for a better life, but it's part of a political calculus stemming from Central America. So I have great angst about 14,000 people coming to our borders. I want people to come here legally, not illegally. But with that being said, you know, it's right midterm elections, and it's activating the base on the issue of immigration. And so I have a bit of angst, a little bit of acid reflux in engaging this strategy. In addition to the birthright citizenship right about now, it's a viable conversation to have, but I don't want to stoke the worst out of America. This president could actually run on one amazing platform, the lowest unemployment rate in a generation, the lowest unemployment rate ever for Hispanics and African Americans, the best GDP we have seen in over a decade. There are so many positive deliverables and metrics that this president and the RNC, for that matter, could really elevate to the next level. They can really push an agenda that really speaks to positivism rather than engaging the fear component.
Well, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you have angst and heartburn over this discussion. What about the birthright citizenship conversation, though? I mean, I'm surprised to hear you giving any leeway at all on that. I would think you'd be completely opposed.
Oh, no, I'm completely opposed if it requires a constitutional amendment. I am one of those. Don't touch the Constitution. If you touch the Constitution, and if you touch this constitutional amendment, the 14th Amendment, what other amendments, are up to play somewhere in the future? So I have great concern with anything that requires a constitutional amendment. At the same time, there is a bit of ambiguity. Heather, how do we deal with the fact that, yes, there is a legitimate concern? There are people, here it is, there are people that actually come into America illegally for the purpose of giving birth, for their children to become legal citizens, and for that to emerge as some sort of a continuum of individuals coming in here with the initial entry being one that's illegal in nature. How do we do that? How do we reconcile the fact that we are a sovereign nation committed to protecting our borders? We can't be embracing the idea of anarchy or chaos. We are a sovereign nation. So how do we do that? So I am not in favor of ending birthright citizenship. It may be one of those elements that makes us exceptional. I know that the UK doesn't have it and New Zealand doesn't have it and the major developed nations with the exception of Canada and the US. I understand that. But there is a conversation to be had. How can we protect legal and naturalized people to make sure legal immigrants and naturalized individuals, if they give birth in this nation, their children should be citizens. Yeah. But how can we likewise build a firewall against the birthing industry and so forth?
It's complicated. Let me just ask you, given all these hot butt immigration issues, and we just have a short time here, but do you think this is going to help or deter in terms of get out the vote with Latino voters?
I don't know if it's going to help, to be honest. I don't know if the immigration rhetoric is going to help. If the idea would have been the lowest unemployment rate in Hispanic American history, that may have helped. The immigration may actually sway some Latinos to say, hey, I'm going to ride this one. I'm not going to participate in this midterm election. And it's unfortunate because I would like to see more Latino go out there and vote and participate in our electoral process.
Right. All right. Pastor Sam Rodriguez, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
And CBN News will have special coverage on election night from 8 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, November 6th. Be sure to join us. Tune in. Here now is a look at some of the other major stories we're following for you inside the CBN newsroom today. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee have cleared Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct allegations. The committee tweeted Saturday investigators spoke with 45 people and took 25 written statements. According to The Hill, the 414-page report states committee investigators found no verifiable evidence that supported Christine Blasey Ford's allegation against Brett Kavanaugh. The report additionally dismisses allegations from two other accusers, Deborah Ramirez and Julie Swetnick. Egypt's security forces have killed 19 militants, including those responsible for a recent attack against Christians. 7 Christians were killed and 16 wounded Friday in an attack on pilgrims traveling to a remote desert monastery. ISIS claimed responsibility for that attack. Egypt's Interior Ministry says the militants responsible were tracked to a hideout in the desert near the site of the attack and were killed in a shootout. Asia Bibi's husband is seeking asylum for his family. He told a German news site he and his family are afraid for their safety. The Christian woman was acquitted on charges of blasphemy last week, sparking numerous protests and calls for a public hanging by the Islamic country. Pakistan's government brokered a deal with the TLP, an Islamist political party known for street power and opposition to the country's blasphemy law, in order to end protests over Asia Bibi's acquittal. Her husband said the deal should have never happened and it sent shivers down his spine. You can find these stories and more throughout the day at cbnnews.com. Today, the U.S. reimposed tough sanctions against Iran. The move has already sparked mass protest in the nation. The sanctions target Iran and the countries that are in trade with it. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has vowed to sell oil and break the sanctions. The country is already in the middle of an economic crisis. Its national currency, the rial, now trades at 145,000 to 1 to the U.S. dollar. Coming up, everywhere you look, it is the age of outrage. So what is a Christian to do? We're going to answer that question when CBN NewsWatch continues right after this. Political divisions are growing wider across the country. One author says it's giving birth to a new age of outrage. In his new book, Ed Stetzer encourages Christians to bring their best when the world is at its worst. Our Charlene Aaron talked with him about it.
Signs of incivility and outrage abound. From our nation's capital, where protesters, angry over the Kavanaugh confirmation process, jammed Senate hallways and interrupted CBN News' coverage of the demonstrations.
Well, today has been one of the rowdiest days during the hearing, both inside the hearing room and outside. The hearing began with the first hour was just very intense between the senators.
To college campuses, where last year rioters virtually took over Berkeley because they wanted to stop a commentator from the conservative Breitbart website from speaking on campus.
It seems that we're in a time when people are increasingly at odds with one another, and it's an outrageous time with a lot of anger.
In his new book, Christians in the Age of Outrage, speaker and author Ed Stetzer points out our country's deep divisions, hoping the church can bring about healing. But before that can happen, he says the church must focus on itself.
I think one of the things that has been important to note in the last few years is that sometimes the political divisions has actually gotten into the church in a way that maybe it hasn't in the past.
Stetzer says Christians can counter the growing outrage we see in our culture today simply by exercising greater spiritual discipline.
My desire is we might act and love and listen and speak more like Jesus would in these situations.
Stetzer, who is also the Billy Graham Distinguished Chair of Church, Mission, and Evangelism at Wheaton College and Executive Director of the Billy Graham Center, says social media is a big part of the problem. He says Christians can hurt their witness by not properly engaging debates on hot topic issues such as gay marriage or politics. He offers a roadmap to navigating online conversations.
We can be in an evangelical echo chamber where everyone sort of thinks like we do, and then we're shocked to find out people have a different worldview, and they do. And we actually found in our research that evangelicals are very likely to mute people or block people who disagree with them. And so you're never hearing different views. So we have almost an undiscipled approach to social media that's alienating our neighbors and building sometimes even divisions between Christians. And what we're calling for in Christians in the Age of Outrage is a change to that, a more thoughtful, biblical, spirit-filled approach that ultimately engages culture more effectively.
He goes on to encourage evangelical Christians to model the message of the gospel.
And so the question is, we have to make choices. How do we speak up for what's right? But also, how do we show and share the love of Jesus in the midst of the brokenness? And I think our research shows that people are saying we've got to see a shift in the way we ultimately engage culture. The division is not helping anybody, and the long term, harming the witness of the gospel.
He says the best way to do that is through proper discipleship.
I actually used to listen to a political show, but I found that I couldn't pray for the president at the time and listen to that person because I got so riled up. And so what I had to do is, in my own discipleship, through spiritual discipline, I had to say, that's shaping me in a way that leads me away from what actually the Bible calls me to do. So I quit listening to that program, kept praying for that president, kept speaking up about things that mattered to me, but I was more discipled by my Bible and in the promptings of the Holy Spirit than I was by the radio program, or today it might be the cable news program that I'm watching.
Meanwhile, in this current culture, Stetzer challenges Christians to intentionally live in a way that makes the gospel more appealing.
I don't know that Christians can solve all the outrage issues. I think the culture has just gone, it's turned up the volume to 11, and it's just going all in on the outrage. So what I would say is, we need to show a counterculture message. The gospel's always been countercultural, right? It's always shown a different way. And when the world's running this way, the scriptures teach a different way. Jesus calls us to a better way. So I think the better way is not to join in and turn up the outrage volume, but instead to enter in on mission.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Wheaton, Illinois.
Still ahead, it is the newest treasure from the time of Jesus. See how this ancient inscription has ties to modern-day Jerusalem. We've got the story when we return. Israeli archaeologists have uncovered a unique link between the Jerusalem of 2,000 years ago and today. It comes in the form of the oldest inscription ever found of the modern Hebrew spelling and pronunciation of Jerusalem. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us that story.
Archaeologists uncovered this pillar during an excavation near the entrance to present-day Jerusalem last winter. The column is here in the Israel Museum's Second Temple Gallery. It's the newest treasure in the exhibit from the time of Jesus. The inscription reads, Hananiah bar Dudalos mi Yerushalayim. Hananiah, the son of Dudalos, from Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, surprisingly for us, is inscribed the same way we write it today and the same way we pronounce it today, Yerushalayim. And it's the first time we have an inscription of this sort from 2,000 years ago, from the times of the Second Temple period.
Senior curator Dodi Mevorach says the name Yerushalayim exists on coins from the Great Jewish Revolt against the Romans in 70 A.D. Those coins had a political agenda, while this inscription does not.
Here, there is no agenda. It's just an artisan from a potter's village stating his name, his father's name, and stating that he is not from the village, but originally he comes from the big city, from Yerushalayim, Jerusalem.
This site was a pottery workshop that started to develop at the end of the 2nd century before Christ and continued to the 2nd century after Christ.
During the excavations, workers exposed the foundations of a Roman structure. One of the supports was the pillar the Romans had reused. It bore an Aramaic inscription in Hebrew letters typical of the time of Herod the Great.
I saw the column with the inscription. It wasn't clean, but I could recognize some letters, and I saw that it's in Hebrew.
Archaeologist Danit Levy of the Israel Antiquities Authority oversaw the excavation.
I was really excited. My heart went so fast, and I think all the people that was around me could hear it.
The site is about 4.5 miles from the old city, which would have been Jerusalem at that time.
So we now know, in a very simple manner, that Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, was called Shalem, Yerushalem, and Yerushalayim at the same time, which we didn't know before. It's just another piece of a mosaic of how we portray the past.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Yerushalayim, Jerusalem.
The Bible continues to come to life. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Operation Blessing is helping to protect children from predators in Latin America. Some estimates report that 2 million children suffer from sexual exploitation each year in Latin America. Operation Blessing created a program called Yo Digno, or I Say No, to train children to protect themselves. Instructors use songs, coloring books, puppets, and games to teach children to say no and to report sexual abuse. Operation Blessing also provides parents with training to help guard their children from predators. Classes currently run in Cuba, Peru, and Honduras. You can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to its website. It's ob.org. Time now for your Monday motivation. I'll leave you with this thought. We've all made mistakes, some of us more than we can count, and sometimes that same mistake over and over. Know this: if you're beating yourself up over a mistake, thinking you've derailed God's plan for your life, here's news for you. You're not that powerful. In fact, God can use all things, including your mistakes, for His glory and for your good. With that word, be sure to make this a marvelous Monday. That will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about, always at cbnnews.com. And we'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing us. The email address is newswatch@cbn.com. Of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Have a marvelous Monday.